Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. My name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and welcome to the Day 2 prompt for RPG A Day 2021 maps. Maps are something that have been part of the tabletop role-playing hobby from the get-go. From the earliest inceptions of D&D, where it came down to everything from city maps to hex grids to tile-based battle maps and what have you. Maps have always had a place in these games for not just showing us where we are in terms of a combat encounter or something like that, which is what most people think of when they think of maps, but where you're located in a city, where you're located in a kingdom, a nation, a continent, a world. Maps have a very major place in this hobby, and they serve a great many number of functions. But they are also something that can kind of get in the way in certain scenarios. Maps are something that you really need to have an understanding of when it is appropriate to use them, and what type of map is appropriate for your game. And that's something that I really had to learn myself over the years. When I started this hobby, I've mentioned before, I've started in 3rd edition, which of course very much treats the game like a tactical battle game with many options. Ridiculous amounts of skills, ridiculous amounts of spells, very intricate and detailed. Obviously not the most intricate and detailed tabletop game in the world, don't get me wrong. There are many others that were far more complicated than D&D 3rd edition was, but 3rd edition, and then of course its later follow-up Pathfinder, you really kind of needed a battle map for it to have the maximum effectiveness. And it can be argued that even in 5th edition, there's a lot of that there as well. When you've got things like movement-based abilities and spells with particular ranges and radiuses and all these different elements coming together, it really shows just how important a map is to these games. How important a battle map in particular is to these games. But that's not always going to work best for what we're trying to do. And my history with maps and their function in tabletop games has really run a huge, wide gamut, because even though I started in 3rd edition, the group that I started with was my best friend Jim from childhood and his stepdad Steve, who was running the game. And Steve got into that hobby very early on. He had been playing since either the late 70s or the early 80s, so he was very much the old school kind of gamer. So we started out learning the old school methods of engaging with maps as players, where you have graph paper and you're gridding out what you're encountering 5-10 feet at a time, 1 or 2 or 3 squares at a time, building the map yourself and acting as a cartographer to figure out where you are, what this dungeon is like, and what the layout is, so that you know where to go and how to get back and what to engage with. Is there something here that we missed? Is there something there that we missed? It was very tactile and in your face and on hand. Nowadays, it's of course very different with the advent of digital tabletops. And those digital tabletops were my next stepping stone where maps were concerned. And there was a half step between them where I had a large vinyl sheet that had a grid on it where I could use wet erase markers to quickly change maps kind of on the fly. But it was really the digital tabletops that got me to understand that the traditional grid-based battle map, it wasn't for me. It wasn't something that I so much enjoyed making anymore. And this was because after years of Pathfinder, after years of having to make these maps and sink hours and hours and hours into designing everything, I started to realize that this tedium was getting to be too much, and I began to favor theater of the mind, and with that came a favoring of more abstract maps, more simplified maps that would show me the way things connected, but allow me to sort of set up and describe a scene so that the players could engage with it that way. And this worked out very nicely because it allowed myself not only to have more time to focus on the game itself as opposed to the map, but it gave my players the freedom to engage with these scenarios in a way that was a little more cinematic and exciting, whereas the typical grid-based battle maps, in my experience, tend to devolve eventually into people standing in place and beating on each other, and that just starts to get boring after a while. And with that, we reach the end of the Day 2 prompt on maps and my experience with, most specifically, battle maps in tabletop gaming, as these were the ones that had the highest impact on my type of play throughout the years. What are your experiences with maps, though? What are some interesting ways that you have used any kinds of maps in tabletop role-playing games? Let me know in the comments down below. While you're down there, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and open up the description box to follow me on my social media presences. Minds.com in particular is the best place to follow me, as I back up the plurality of my content there. Also, you can follow my Webtoons link to read Phoenix Rising, my monthly fantasy adventure webcomic. If you find the idea of a classic fantasy adventure story with a touch of intrigue and comedy and a good amount of heart appealing to you, I highly recommend reading it, because I am sure you're going to find something to enjoy there. And now, with that said and done, friends and gamers of all stripes, once again, my name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and as always, in the world of tabletop gaming, you want to make sure that you do not just sit back and watch, but get in there and game. Have a good one.